All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We are going to start our webinar series today, and we have Lauren Hicks here to talk about ag and insurance and all of those questions. We've had a lot of questions from members lately, so we're here to have her kind of share her expertise. So thank you, Lauren, for being with us, and you have the floor.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try to share my screen, so I apologize. Just give me 1 second while I get my screen shared. So I'm going to be touching base today on kind of the insurance, kind of our hardening market with the insurance and the impacts of COVID, and then just a little about the difference between true commercial insurance versus the water program that we kind of run here at our office. So I will get started. I'll do a slight introduction of myself, and just so you know, I'm about to throw a lot of content at you guys. I'm not going to talk too much. Really, the content, the slides that you're going to see pop up in a little bit, really what that is for is more of a reference for you all after the presentation. And keep in mind, I'm more than happy to send anybody anything if they need. So give me a sec. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right, can you see, Amber?
Yep, we sure can.
All right, let's see if I can zoom out here. Okay, well, it doesn't look so great on Google Docs, so I apologize. Actually, if you can, I'm gonna open the PDF. Are you able to see that, or are you just looking at the Google Docs?
No, that looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go from here. So I'm just going to go through just quick about us. I personally handle with my team, of course, my Colorado team. We handle about 650 different water clients throughout the state of Colorado, as well as in other states. We really focus on Colorado water because, as everybody knows, little different than how the other states are run. We obviously retain, a lot of states try to get rid of. So I'm a fourth generation insurance professional. My father, as many of you know, Charles Hicks, he actually started the water insurance program. So the risk transfer insurance program with Kemper back in 1989, which was, I think, about the same year, you know, some of the pools got started for water in Colorado. And then we switched over to, with Fireman's Fund, we switched over to Kemper in about 2002, and then we partnered with Glatfelter, which is the main water program for Colorado currently, and it's for public and private entities, which is wonderful. A couple of the major perks with Glatfelter is the unlimited defense costs, the first dollar defense on claims, and first dollar basis on claims. So like I said, fourth generation insurance professional. I've been in water. I mean, a lot of you I saw, you know, when I was a kid, when my dad was out in the field. I've been doing it about 17 years now, and he retired 4 years ago. So I've been running it for about 4 years, lock, stock, and barrel. And I work with just about everybody that's related to water. So whether that's engineering, actual water districts, private irrigation firms, all the way up to, you know, I've got law firms that we work with, anything like that. So pretty much anything water related. And of course, I do not have my law degree, but I like to take lots of the water classes with, you know, Justice Hobbs and things like that. So ex-Justice Hobbs. All right, so like I said, I'm going to throw, and I'm going to, of course, talk fast. Feel free to raise your hand or ask questions as we go. I will try to see, Amber, I may have you monitor the chat box just while I'm presenting, if you don't mind. Yeah, and just let me know if there's any questions. So this is a market update that we prepare quarterly. And so this is spring, summer. We'll have ours for fall, of course, after Q3 wraps, we get it all wrapped up. So obviously COVID's had some major impacts. I will, just to preface this, what I am presenting to you is truly our public entity and agribusiness, so our for-profit farms. So when I mention agribusiness, just keep in mind those are for-profit farms, so income generating. And this report is something that we do world and nationwide, and it's based on the marketplace with all of our carriers. So this is kind of a brief overview, and then I will get into the weeds a little bit just in regards to water. So like I said, obviously we had a major impact with COVID. We've actually had one of our busiest years in insurance. You know, we lost a lot of businesses, but then a lot of businesses are also growing as well as this moves through. But as you can see, kind of the line of coverage there on the right-hand side in the current marketplace, these are the rate increases on the right-hand side, and it's going to go by line, and I'll kind of touch on each of these. The DNO, directors and officers, that portion is where we are seeing the most drastic, obviously other than property. This program has been an amazing program that we run with the insurance, but overall, I mean, property, we're up 10 to 25%. I've seen some 30% increases across the board. So it's getting pretty bad. So on the public directors and officers, that's really, you know, any sort of publicly traded company, that's really where they're going to see drastic changes. But on our private companies, we're still seeing about that 10% increase on things. So I'm going to scroll down, and this is property. So and some of you may have noticed this even in your commercial businesses or other entities that you work with, but and this is very true, so about 85% of our clients overall, other than in the water program, just commercial clients in general, ag clients in general, saw about an 85% increase over, you know, since 2000. So the property has just, as we know, and it's mostly from cat losses, catastrophic, so cat stands for catastrophic losses, mostly from cat losses. So you can see in here on the year, obviously 2013 Colorado isn't particularly reflected in here, but you can see by year in, you know, Q1, Q2, how bad it gets, you know, in the year. So some of them are just terrible, and it's all based on an average, you know, same with the pool, same with us. So the carrier takes an average of everybody and kind of adjusts the rate. Nice thing about this program is it's individually rated. So there are not set rates within this program with this carrier. Everything is manually rated, manually underwritten on proprietary forms. So that's why you won't ever see just a standard rate increase across the board. Everybody is individually underwritten and taken into consideration, which is great. So going down into the workers' compensation, this has actually been the best. So we haven't really seen, of course, as most of you are aware, Pinnacle is the #1 in Colorado and what we primarily use. Of course, we can, you know, write with many others, but the rate on that irrigation works operations class is the best. Over the years, it's actually just kind of done a zigzag, you know, in Colorado, it's really done a zigzag. So it's gone up and down and up and down. Over the last 3 years, we actually saw a little bit of a rate decrease. This year, there was a slight rate increase, but it's almost been a wash as far as, you know, with discounts that they're applying and things like that, it's been a wash. But as you can see, overall, there are certain states that are going to be, you know, affected a little bit more. And then as far as COVID and the workers' compensation, at first, you know, people were very apprehensive to cover any sort of COVID claim. So all the carriers were very apprehensive. You had to prove that you got it from work, which is almost impossible to, you know, with the contact tracing, it's just very hard. But, you know, Pinnacle, other carriers have really stepped up their game. They have put procedures in place for contact tracing. They are covering certain COVID claims, you know, and then of course, underwriters are being very particular about how are you protecting your employees? You know, what are you doing to ensure that the public and everybody is protected, basically. But workers' comp has probably been the most steady so far. Now, general liability, unfortunately, it's been rough. So as far as rates go, we haven't had too much of a rate increase. General liability, it tends to stay pretty even, even on the commercial side of things. But as you can see, the median average for verdicts for the top 50 cases has doubled in the last 4 years. And that, so, you know, we're going from maybe a 500 million to $1 billion claim. So some of these, and you'll see some stats here at the end, but these claims are general liability, and it's the awards. So either the judge or the jury awards that are being, and a lot of them are punitive, unfortunately. One great thing, and one thing y'all should look out for, is those punitive exclusions. One thing, you know, we make sure to include is punitive, but you want to make sure you're looking out for those, because especially with this COVID, you know, oh, well, I got it, I couldn't work, I'm suing my employer because I got it from you. So you just want to watch out for kind of that pain and suffering type of punitive damages when we're moving into the general liability. Like I said, we've just had a huge uptick in claims, and some of those too in injunctions. So we've had a lot of, and some of you may have seen some, you know, information from me directly, but we've had a large uptick in injunctive relief claims. So just an injunction, they're just filing, and the administrative costs that go in with dealing with injunctions, depending, is tough, which that generally will fall under the general liability or the directors and officers, depending on how the policy is written. So injunction, that's one of the things too that's kind of driving these reserves or these, you know, legal costs, because the legal's having to deal with it and all the administrative. So it's been tough. Auto, I'm sure everybody is aware, it's pretty much the same. I mean, obviously commercial is a little bit less expensive than personal, but I'm sure everybody's aware auto rates have definitely gone up. 2016, 2017 were big years for auto with the hail. Springs got hit really bad, Mills got hit pretty bad, and then of course we had some really bad storms up north. So when auto happens, everything goes up. As far as COVID goes, of course, COVID really isn't going to affect it very much. So there's not really any impact on it. You do have like that medical payments coverage available in auto coverage, but again, not tied to COVID. So we really haven't seen, and I wouldn't anticipate any rate increases or really any changes based on COVID. On the general liability, though, we are seeing, and I'll touch base on it too when we get to the excess or umbrella liability, we are seeing carriers strengthen their infectious disease contamination exclusions. So they are actually developing policies and exclusions specifically around COVID to make sure that they are not covering it. So just good conversations to have either with your broker. I'm happy to answer any questions, but just good conversations to have, you know, is there an exclusion? What exactly does it cover? And I'll get into that too a little bit further. You know, what can your policy cover when it comes to, you know, when it comes to the COVID pandemic? It's been tough. So here's the umbrella. Again, so here is, of course, your general liability is going to cap out. If you have an excess and umbrella, the limits automatically go, they're exceeded under the underlying, and then the umbrella excess picks up. So as you can see here, these of course aren't exactly water related, of course, but active shooter can happen anywhere. So, and products liability, though those claims not really gonna matter to this group at all, but you know, if you're in your own commercial world, if you have products liability exposures, we have seen quite a few of those. So you can see the sexual assault, we have had quite a few of these in the water world, and it's really not sexual assault, more just assault or harassment type of claims. But I mean, you can see here, $1 billion from a real estate firm. So these, you know, hospitality, which would be hotels, active shooter, 800 million settlement, you know, so these settlements, they're getting really, really high. In regards to COVID and settlements, that's the only thing that, in regards to COVID and umbrellas, the only thing that carriers are really do is they're trying to make money. So they're going to exclude what they can. They are going to really start underwriting and questioning umbrellas, and it's becoming very, very hard to purchase either excess umbrella. And we might have a carrier that will offer $1 million, but they will not go anything above it. So we're having to stack limits and get carriers to participate in, you know, 750,000, while another participates in 250,000. So we're having to take, you know, what used to be one policy and get 4 different carriers to make up that one policy we used to have. So we are just, the umbrella market has become a very hard market, and COVID has not helped at all. So we do, as you can see, 91% increase across the board. Luckily, again, with the water program, this is a very, very controlled program that I work with, the actual insurance program that I work with. It's very controlled. Claims are managed very, very well. So we have not seen these yet, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. So they're strengthening the endorsements, strengthening the exclusions, and they are really underwriting. So you may even have an interview with an underwriter at this point where the underwriter is asking you directly versus working through a broker or an agent. They may be asking you directly, you know, what are your operating procedures? And then some of the things that you all should just be kind of thinking about too, and a lot of what I've been doing recently since COVID is, you know, reviewing bylaws and articles. And as we know, a lot of these insurance policies have contractual liability built in. So when those your bylaws basically tie the board. So really the board, how they operate, they're really tying you to that insurance policy. So basically what the bylaws say is kind of how the insurance is going to respond. And so some of the things I've just been recommending, reviewing your bylaws, making sure legal has reviewed them, because a lot of them haven't been touched since the 1800s, since you guys first started. So I recommend reviewing your bylaws, maybe strengthening them and adding possibly a communicable disease or, you know, anything like that, some sort of a clause or just a note into the bylaws. That is one thing that can kind of help on the liability, the general and then articles of incorporation. And of course, if you have any sort of rules and regs, standard operating procedures, any sort of manuals that you run by, I do suggest being reviewed after this. And we can always, of course, provide tons of material, and I'll get to that in a minute, but we can provide tons of material to help strengthen. We do reviews, so anything you guys need, happy to help. So directors and officers, this, as I go through these next slides, I'm going to go kind of quick because some of it is about publicly traded companies, which, as we know, in Colorado, the water is not publicly traded. These are truly stock market companies. So other than that, the private side, we are, of course, seeing. So you can see actually here under the bottom, there's other tips, all companies, public and private. This is really what you want to pay attention to. So when they're talking about this philosophy, this is like your bylaws. So, and that's almost something you want to include in the bylaws is that philosophy. And maybe strengthening the philosophy or the culture a little bit. So, and then of course, insider trading, nobody has to worry about that really, unless you are publicly traded. So, and then other than that, as far as the COVID, we always suggest any changes, anything be reviewed by outside counsel, and outside counsel may also have, and we work directly with them too. So they may have some suggestions, particularly related to COVID as well. Going down into here. So sorry about that. Again, this, I'm just going to kind of really skip over this one. This is truly for publicly traded companies. So this is securities class action. These are securities. This is nationwide. So this is just showing everybody nationwide. So this next one, so the core filings, those are lawsuits, the number of lawsuits that the courts are getting. And you can see it's just going up. So even if we are declining or the judge is dismissing, we are still getting the claim. So you might get the lawsuit in, we're still having to respond. I will tell you, we have not yet, knock on wood, we have not yet seen lawsuits for COVID, now COVID related type. So one of the things you may hear or see is an employee suing, like I said, because they think that they got COVID from the employer and they sue the employer. Truthfully, that is going to fall most likely under the employer's liability, which is actually a portion of your workers' compensation. And then with that, just as a side note, you should always make sure, and we make sure of it for you, but if you don't have coverage with me, make sure that you have your employer's liability policy covered under your umbrella. So it must be scheduled as an underlying insurance policy for that to be afforded coverage under the umbrella. So most likely, if you've got state minimums, it's 100 per each person, 100 per accident, and then 500 overall. We actually increase those limits usually to around 500,000. And then if you have your umbrella on top of that, you have a 500 plus a million or whatever limit you may have. But I highly suggest you review, if your employer's liability is included under there, because if you're going to see those claims, they'll likely come from there. And then the other thing to keep in mind on the directors and officers, and this is just really big, is the if defense costs are inside or outside of the limit of insurance, and what is the limit. So obviously we want unlimited defense costs, and we want them outside the limit of insurance. You do not want them inside the limit, because the second you have a claim and legal fees are assessed, that comes straight out of the limit. So if the judge or the jury makes $1 million award and you have $1 million limit, you've got $1 million plus whatever legal fees out of pocket. So just when you're reviewing and when you're going through your renewals, make sure or see if there's some way to endorse unlimited defense costs. So this is the unresolved D&O claims. Just, the reason this has gone up so far is because lawyers are starting to come back. So they're basically reopening or going back to cases, old cases. So you're going to see an uptick, honestly, probably for the next 3 years until they get this backlog cleared out. And then that'll probably taper back down. But the D&O wasn't it's always been a huge concern, but wasn't a hot ticket, I would say, until probably the last 5 years. So it's just, you can see the changes here. So on that right-hand side, again, those are more securities. The, SLUSA, that's the Securities Litigation Uniform Act or whatever this is. You do not need to worry so much about this. But this event-driven D&O, this is really where, so that COVID-19, where you may see a claim under that D&O for COVID particularly would be if the employee, so let's say the employee sues the board, because the operating procedures haven't been updated. So there was no procedure put in place by the board or management in order to protect, and they sue the board. And keep in mind, one of the other things to keep in mind on the D&O, on the directors and officers, is if you are covered individually and as a whole. So you may hear people talk about side A, B, and C coverage. On proprietary forms, that side A, B, and C coverage doesn't really apply. Side C coverage is really for publicly traded anyway, but that A and B is truthfully the organization as a whole and then the individual members on the board. So you really want to make sure individually you're covered. And then I, of course, always suggest anyone who serves on a board, I always suggest having your own personal umbrella. And when you get that umbrella, you should notify the carrier. So your personal insurance that you have, you should be notifying that carrier that you do sit on a board, whether that's for your HOA, for a water entity, for a public entity, whatever that may be. I always suggest having your personal just in case. You never know. Plus, if it's not water related, it's always good to have that umbrella to protect you on another board. But make sure your carrier knows, because there may be an exclusion for certain types of board activities or things like that. So again, I can answer more questions on that. So this, obviously, the last 2 years, that Me Too, off of COVID a little bit, but that Me Too is where we've really seen it. And then environmental. So as we know in Colorado, somebody sees orange water and we're going to get a phone call from the EPA, and there's going to be probably some fines, some investigative costs, and the EPA does push that back to the entity. So on the environmental, it's really pollution. You really just want to kind of be careful, make sure you've got it. And then again, COVID, if there's COVID in the water, we just had one locally that tested, some little in the water treatment facility. So, I don't think it's a bad idea at this point to be trying to test the water if you are distributing. So obviously irrigators, private irrigators, not much you guys can do. Just be aware that shareholders, if they claim or make a lawsuit against the board that they got COVID from the water that was distributed to them because the board didn't check, again, you could have that in place. So one of the things I've just been suggesting is to try to see if you can test the water for COVID, any particulates or anything like that. So and this M&A, just so you know, M&A, for any of you who aren't aware, that's mergers and acquisitions. Again, more larger publicly traded companies. But if you have a ditch company that is acquiring another ditch company and folding them in, or acquiring those ditch miles, definitely something to consider, as well as the board and how it's been managed in the past. So acquisitions, mergers, not so much acquisitions. You might acquire another ditch company, or two ditch companies may merge because they have similar boards. Again, talk with your broker, talk with legal, just to make sure everything is covered, there's no exclusions, and that we can add, named insureds to a policy, or if we need to separate liability to make sure that one doesn't affect the other. So moving down, again, this is just real quick, it's just a pricing index. So you can see here, it's just gone up a lot. Obviously the right-hand side, most concern, hospitality, none of these are really gonna matter to you. The DNO for private, like I said, has been great. It's the public entities, governmental, districts, unfortunately, that we've seen a little bit of an increase. And again, not so much in this program, but more so on the commercial side of things. So cyber is a huge hot ticket, and it became an even bigger hot ticket during COVID. I hope everybody out there has just individual, credit protection and things like that, InfoArmor, LifeLock, something like that. I always suggest it. It is well worth the money, and if you need recommendations, but I've been hacked, so that's the reason I recommend it. Other than that, on the business side, commercially, cyber, as we all know, many of us started working from home. So not only did home networks not have firewalls and things set up on them, we had true hackers that took full advantage of the COVID situation because they knew so many people were unprotected working from home. So honestly, at this point, make sure you have a good, robust cyber policy, first and third party coverage. First party coverage, that's damages to you. And one of the things you really want to look out for is this middle button under the take steps to assess. The middle ticket right there is the business interruption. So perfect example, we had an entity, and I'm talking a 2-employee, tiny little entity doesn't have a storefront or anything. Employee logged in one morning, had a thing that popped up on the computer, said, you must pay us 10,000 Bitcoin in order for us to release your systems and all of your files. Otherwise, we are going to basically wipe your computer. Unfortunately, they went ahead and paid they went ahead and paid the ransom. So they went ahead and paid that out. And then they called us, and we got involved after the fact. We were able to do some negotiations with the carrier to get some coverage, but cyber fraud has become so big, it is huge, and they are doing it, and they are so smart about it that if you ever have an incident with cyber, get in touch with your agent immediately, or your broker immediately, because not only if you pay that amount, it can negate coverage, but second of all, you don't know who you're paying, where it's going, what they are really going to have access to. So we are trained, especially on the cyber side, it's so amped on our side of things. Once we get a claim in, we will try to get into the system and actually negotiate with these hackers. If we cannot negotiate the Bitcoin amount down, or at least get it removed, sometimes we can even get them out of the system without paying them at all. But normally we are having to do some negotiation. And typically what happens after we pay a negotiation is we actually have them basically sign something saying they are not allowed to release any private information. We have paid you your ransom. If this goes out, we will come after you. Full-fledged. So a couple of letters, I don't know if you guys have ever seen them, but the letters that come from the carriers basically say, we have paid this ransom on behalf. The hacker has agreed that your files will stay protected. If anything does happen, ensure that, we ensure that you have coverage. But so let us handle that. It's what the insurance is for. And there's so few people trained, unless you have a true full-blown IT department. But again, that IT person should be getting in touch with the broker immediately, because you really want this to fall to insurance. And with COVID, it is just, we have had probably at least a couple of claims a day in regards to cyber. So First of all, firewalls, check if you've got local internet. Your local providers are great about letting you know what you can do. And even on their websites, Comcast, Quest, whoever it may be, they have all of, these resources to help you protect. And then don't ever, hesitate putting in dual authentication. So dual authentication is a great way to keep your stuff confidential. People can't hack it. So, and then also, using emails that are encrypted. And I'm not talking about third-party encryption, but Gmail, Yahoo is not as great. AOL is actually the best. You would be surprised. AOL, Gmail, Outlook is great. Obviously, Microsoft Office, anything like that. Those are going to be automatically encrypted to a point. So using your own domain, if you have one, just make sure the encryption is good on your own domains. So just quick kind of review, hardening market, it's really getting there. So we haven't, and that's the thing is we haven't seen a hardening market since 2000, probably early 2000. And with COVID, it's probably going to get worse. Now, of course, workers' comp may not be affected unless we start getting very big claims. And then auto probably won't be affected either, but everything else is most likely. So if you can see there on the bottom, it just kind of gives a real quick agribusiness. This is truthfully for when it's saying agribusiness down here, it's food production and then livestock as well. So like I said, underwriting may just get a little bit more in your business. There may be some amped up coverage enhancements and some coverage exclusions directly related to COVID, and there may even be a COVID exclusion. So those, we are seeing enhancements. I haven't seen exclusion for COVID yet, but we are seeing these communicable disease exclusions getting enhanced. So these I will kind of I'm not going to go through these, but this is just segment. So this is just the impact that some of us have seen. So as you can see on the bottom here, this is buildings without sprinklers. They're getting tough. They're getting tough to insure. Livestock, it's always been, I mean, we have some really great livestock programs where it's not too much of an issue, but that mortality is getting a little pricey, I'm sure, as you farmers have become aware of. It's getting a little pricier than it used to be. But so I'm going to keep scrolling down. And again, product recall, not really big for you guys. And then the liability, again, that communicable disease, it's getting tough. So the latest information you'll see a link down in here. Our website has just endless, whatever you need. If it's for a specific sector, even if you're not with us, you can access this information. It's just ajg.com. And then, like I said, I have an actual click for it, but these are all hot links. So if you guys need to click on these, this will take you directly, anything you see that's underlined, it'll take you directly to the page. Obviously, WHO, and then you guys probably won't deal too much with Singapore or Australia, or Canada, I should say, but these are all just information for around the world. So if you're traveling, great for personally, if you're traveling out of the country in the next, year or so. So this is to protect myself and others. Most of you have heard this. If you've been watching the news, you've definitely heard this stuff. Obviously, cold, like sometimes if you're going to the doctor, you've all heard this, so I'm not going to go through it. This is just kind of a FYI. And then the key coverages. So I did not include it in here because it's just too much verbiage, but so for each of these, so this says what coverages, or insurance policies will cover my business for the pandemic particularly. So as you can see here, it says, while there's limitations, there should be coverages available in each of these different areas. So work comp, general liability, management, business interruption, pollution. So like I said, if you want, I've got long descriptions of kind of how the policy will respond. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds. You guys can reach out to me individually if you'd like, but we have very particular, and it's also on our website. So if you want to, I think it's the small business frequently asked questions flyer. And this will go through each one of these coverage lines and basically tell you what to ask your broker for, what could be available, what kind of claims can I file, what would be covered, what should I do to improve my policy, things like that. So it's pretty in depth. That's why I didn't want to share it, but great information in there. And then how can I manage? So this is the big thing. And it's really, your employees and then the public, because you're working with the public all the time. So I really wanted to include this in here, but really the only thing you can do is just, document and standard procedure. So same thing every day. Don't change the procedure. Make sure you're socially distanced. Make sure you've got the right postings on the office. If you have an office, make sure you are not coming in close contact without proper protection with shareholders or citizens. Just kind of do your due diligence like we've been doing. And if you have questions or need, tips or anything for particular or an SOP, standard operating procedure for COVID, also something that we can do. So this is just kind of this is like a recommendation, just a kind of overall, really in regards to DNO and the COVID. So underwriting tiers, this is going to go market increase. So the different tiers, basically different revenue volumes. So quick overview on this, just again, make sure you're reviewing, going through, make sure you don't have any exclusions, and make sure you've got that robust defense endorsement. So this is the page I was referring to. So we've got the return to work resources, and this is, again, particularly for Gallagher. So this is, of course, a little proprietary stuff, but it's available to anybody. But so these links you can click on, and we've got, so this top one, that commercial businesses coronavirus FAQs, that's what's going to go through each of the coverage lines and tell you what is available. And it's a good, great reference document. So, and if you need anything or if you want additional consulting on this, just let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions. And then same thing here. So in addition, and this is something that you should, also be getting from your broker too, if I'm not your broker, but all of these, basically all of these bullet points right here are very important. And I would say that bottom one is probably the key, that industry specific resources. So, I mean, as we all know, the commercial world is very different than the water world, especially in regards to insurance and the programs that are offered. And I would say stats and everything wise, you really just want to make sure that you are getting accurate and up-to-date information for specific to the industry. Because as we can see, even from this presentation, there's such a big difference from regular commercial to the water. And for those of you that are, do work with me, you've probably noticed over, the last 20 years, we've had pretty steady either flat or rate decreases. We very rarely have rate increases, which is great. But again, it's because it's a very niche focused water only program. So these are just things I very highly recommend. And once you go to the pandemic preparedness page, you can actually click on each of these and they will do a drop down and show you tons of resources within each of these. So, if you have an employee that's going on leave, again, this will provide for COVID, and this is all COVID related. So, and then the cybersecurity, this is great for those of you who aren't too familiar with it or are just kind of getting into it, don't have the coverage maybe. This is great to help you kind of develop a cyber program or work with your broker to help them get you a cyber program. And a lot of times I will let you know, cyber can be very, very inexpensive if it's included in the package. When included in a package, though, there's a lot of limitations and exclusions. So just be careful when you're getting a package cyber policy and just make sure you review in depth with your broker. So this is just a really quick overview of just Glatfelter. That's Glatfelter Public Practice. This is the water entity that the water insurance program that I work with. We are actually the regional director for this program. So if you want access to this program, you actually do have to come through me, anyone in the US. So if anybody's trying to write water insurance through this program, they actually do come through me. And this program I just can't speak highly enough about it. Even after 2013, we've had an average 1 to 3% rate decrease on property. DNO has continually gone down, excess has stayed flat. The rates have just been amazing, even when we're having exposure increases. So when we're adding vehicles and payroll and contracts and things like that, they adjust other lines, which is the great thing about not having a set rate for a program and having manually done rates. So this is just a quick, some of the things in here, enhanced coverages, and then we have very specialized underwriting that only does water. So that's all they know is Colorado water. And then that's it for me. Talked really fast and threw a lot at you. I told you.
Thanks, Lauren. What kind of questions do you guys have? Anybody?
This is Dawn.
Go for it, Dawn.
Hey, Dawn.
Hey, Lauren. Thank you very much. That really was like drinking from the fire hose. That was so much information. But there are a few things you mentioned that kind of struck a chord with me. I hadn't really started to put the whole COVID concept into the ditch companies. So that is very interesting. You know that we already have our 2 policies through you. But we only have 1 employee. Do you recommend when you have small ditch companies where you only have a single employee to still do that type of coverage?
Yeah, and you'll want to have of course you need work comp even if you have 1 paid employee, and then the umbrella. So you just want to make sure the umbrella covers 2 because it'll extend that employer's liability.
Gotcha. So it's good for whether you're small or big.
Oh yeah, and it all depends on limits, right? So a smaller entity might have $1 million limit, where a larger entity might have a $25 million limit. So it just depends on, and I mean, the truth is claims are not based on revenue, right? So they're based on jury. So a lot of times I'll assess limits. So I actually have a program that I use that will kind of do a recommendation based on class and exposures and things like that, that will tell you where you should probably be as far as liability is concerned.
Gotcha. Well, expect a call.
Anyone else? That was a lot of great information. All right. Well, thank you, Lauren. We appreciate you and all of the coverage and everything that you've given to us. So we will let you go, and we just really appreciate you.
Of course. And Amber, I will email you this presentation in a PDF if you just kind of want to blast it out. That way people have it so they can click on the links. That'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you, Lauren.
Of course. Thanks, Annie.
Lauren.